Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and my listeners get the story behind every book. Joining me today is Dr. Bernard NG. Dr. NG is here to talk about his very important book, Depression Kidnapped My Wife, a guide for husbands who want to help. Dr. NG is certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in general psychiatry and in psychosomatic medicine. He's also certified by the Mexican Board of Psychiatry. He's a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and has served as a chairman of physician well-being and bioethic committees at local hospitals. Additionally, he's a member of the American Psychiatric Association, the Imperial County Medical Society, the San Diego Psychiatric Society, and the American Medical Association. Currently, he's the principal investigator for Sun Valley Research Center, Incorporated. Wow, Dr. NG, that's quite a resume. Welcome to Books on Air. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think what you've done is extremely important, and I'm always curious. People write books for a lot of reasons, and I always, in my mind, think that every book that anyone picks up has two stories. There is the story or the information that they will read when they read the book itself, but there's always a story behind that book. How did you make the decision to write a book for husbands? How did Depression Kidnapped My Wife come about?
Well, after completing my training in psychiatry, I moved to a little town here in Imperial County, which is where I still practice. And it became very clear to me year after year, and after treating a lot of female patients with depression, that if they had a understanding and supportive husband, they did better. And then I said, okay, how can we go about helping the women that don't enjoy that the supportive husband or boyfriend or fiancé, and then it occurred to me, because it happened in real life, that I would say, why don't you invite your husband? Why don't you bring him to your next visit? And the stories started to be similar. Husbands puzzled, husbands who wanted to help, but they couldn't do it or didn't know how to do it, until I said, what if I put it down in a book, combined with, of course, which is something that we do, colleagues and professionals like me, which we call psychoeducation, which is explaining to the patient and their loved ones about what is it that they're going through. It changed things. So I said, I felt like I had to do it. I couldn't help it, and so I started writing it. And it is one of those projects that takes years, right? Because you start getting information from here, from there, trying to put it in a certain style, until finally it got done. But that was the original reason, trying to help my patients who certainly had someone at home who was interested in helping and didn't know how to.
I think that's exactly a perfect way to phrase that, because when people hear a diagnosis and they don't really understand it, they don't have medical training, they don't have medical background, they don't have any understanding of psychiatry, then they don't know what that means. And so it's scary. And so when we're scared, we don't know what to do. And I think everyone looks for guidance. And I agree with you about having a supportive husband. I'm blessed with one of those wonderful supportive husbands. But I know that every woman is not. And I think that this book is just, as I read through it, I just thought, this is exactly what someone needs. Now, the way you organized it, I think, is very interesting. And let's give the listeners a little bit of an overview of the book and then talk about a few specifics.
Sure. Well, one of the challenges has been, and one of my goals ever since I was in medical school, I had a professor that told me, he was talking to a group of us students, and some of them were expressing that they wanted to go into private practice, some wanted to go into teaching, some wanted to go into research. And then he said, well, let me tell you guys, regardless of what you decide to do, don't forget that you'll always be a teacher, and your students will be your patients, because it's your job to translate all this scientific jargon or those complicated clinical names into something understandable to your patients. You're obligated to do that. And I still remember that, which is many decades ago. And that was my main challenge with this book, that it could be easy to read, easy to understand, but full of very important, updated information about depression. And that's how I came about the different chapters, which begins with what to do right away. That's like quick recommendations. That's how the book starts. And in just 3 pages, the interested husband can have an idea where to go. And then comes the list of about 20 chapters that each one of them tells you one specific thing. And the other thing is that after reading chapter 1 and 2, you can actually pick any other chapter in any order you want, because each chapter in itself is going to try to answer whatever a specific question you might have.
That's what struck me. That's the 2 of the things that struck me about the book. First of all, the language that you chose to use. You talk about a process that is a scientific process in non-scientific language, if I can say that right, that it's easy to read, it's easy to understand. And this is a book that if someone has a spouse or another loved one or knows someone, they would want this book and they would want to keep this book because it's a reference book. Once the person gets on the road to recovery, perhaps they have some sort of occurrence that makes them backslide into something that they don't want to be in. And so it may create questions that the person didn't think to ask the first time, or a situation they didn't have to deal with the first time. And the book is there for them to use as reference. Am I on target with that?
Absolutely. For example, the first chapters, number 3 through 6, they talk about depression itself and what is the difference between being sad and feeling low to actually having depression, which is an illness. And, I explain how is it that we call it in the clinical field, and at one point it does become a disease. And then after that, we talk about what we call in medicine differential diagnosis and complications. And that's chapters 7 and 8. So it's like, okay, don't wait until this gets worse. Don't expect that it's just going to get better naturally or spontaneously. Trying to help the reader understand the seriousness of taking care of this. And then when you start with chapter 9 through 14, it's about healing. And there's where definitely your point comes up. Maybe they are struggling here with taking medication or not taking medication. And the doctor is recommending that, and yes, no. So that's the chapter they want to look into, which is the biological healing. Where, by the way, I don't only speak about medications, but also about diet, also about exercise, about other things that work physically or biologically for the patient. But then that's probably the moment that the husband decides to read that chapter. And things start to improve, and now come other things. For example, I have a chapter 13, which is healing within your family and your social group, where as your wife is getting better, it turns out now there's some struggles with family members, with your wife's brother or your wife's parents or your wife's friends. So then, yes, absolutely right. That was the idea. The reader can go back and say, let me pull out that book again. That chapter I didn't read at that time because it wasn't necessary at the moment. But now I need some guidance on how to deal with this friend of my wife or this relative of my wife who's asking all these questions, and how should I go about it?
You know, it also strikes me, the way that the book is written, you would talk to your children. I mean, this almost sets out a way that a couple could sit down and talk to their children and say, look, here's what's going on. If you have questions, here's a book that you can use for reference, but come to me and let's talk about this as a family so that the kids really understand what's happening and they don't, sometimes parents don't really level with their children because they think their children can't handle it or won't be able to understand. I think your book is written in language that's easy enough for children to understand at a certain level. I mean, what do you think? Junior high, high school?
Oh, yes, definitely. And the other important thing here, since you mentioned it, I do have in chapter 18 a big question. As a parent, you have to be asking yourself if your wife has been diagnosed and struggling with depression, and you've been accompanying her in this journey, which is difficult, but with solutions. That's one thing I keep on saying throughout the book. There is treatment for this, and people get better. But anyway, point is that how about your children inheriting this disorder or these liability to develop depression in the future? So I try to answer that question too, because as a parent, that I know is a question that is or has been in the mind of a lot of my patients' husbands, and also the issue of how the children can better understand why their mother is going through such a hard time, why they may be seeing their parents argue, and they may even be concerned that the marriage may be breaking up, and it doesn't always end up that way. So I think that discussing with the children what's going on is definitely helpful. The book can help. And as far as your question exactly of what age they can actually read the book and understand it, definitely junior high and up is material that they can definitely understand.
And I think it could encourage discussion. I think if you have a book like this in your house and the mother, the wife is going through this kind of situation, I think that because of the way this book is written and because of the encouraging relationship that you're trying to develop between the husband and wife, I think that could open up discussions for the children that otherwise husband, wife individually might feel very uncomfortable talking to their children about. That's kind of an intention, I think, right?
Yes, and the other thing is that depression or mental illness in general has been a taboo in many families, right?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Mm-hmm.
And and then you get the influence of the neighbor, the friend, or the children with their school friends, and this gives bottom line scientific established information that is widely accepted and proven, where you can talk with facts, without having to be afraid of it. And we talk about risks, for example, which are specific of women, for example, postpartum depression, premenstrual symptoms, and of course the risk of suicide, for example. We touch those topics in a clinical, scientific way with the language that anybody can understand, and to know how to prevent it, how to help the person to get through this.
There's a part of the book that you'd like to share with the listeners. Why don't we do that now?
Oh, yes. I really thank you for this opportunity, because this was sort of the beginning of the idea, and I actually wrote it in chapter 1. And it starts with the dialogue, which, by the way, every chapter has a dialogue, which is one story made of different stories from different women that were sharing with me how they felt, how they got through it, and how much better they ended up feeling after they responded to treatment. So I have this part very close to my heart, because this is how the story started. So here is the husband addressing his wife, asking, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" To which she answers, "Can you just leave me alone? I will tell you when I'm ready." "Okay, just wondering. I just don't want you to get upset later on with traffic and all." "Sure. So if at the end we are late, it will be all my fault, right?" No, I didn't say that." After taking a deep breath, the husband replies, "It's okay, baby. I just want us to have fun, okay? Take all the time you need." And so the book continues. Does this sound familiar to you? Are you puzzled, frustrated, or frankly angry? Does it feel as if you no longer know what to expect the next time you see your wife? She has become a different person in many ways. You now think things twice before you speak, because you don't know if she will get angry, cry, or simply shut down for the rest of the day, or worse yet, for several days. So this is what husbands go through, and this is the part I wanted to share about the book.
I really like that, and I like the fact that you use and incorporate that dialogue back and forth, because I think that dialogue itself resonates, and I think that that's a very important thing for a book to do. I think when somebody sits there and reads that little scene that you just set up for us, almost everyone has had a conversation like that with a spouse. But what's different this time? And is this conversation becoming more and more and more frequent? And are the anger episodes becoming... it just makes you begin to think. I love it that you started out with conversations like that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Now, I think that we've given our listeners enough information that they're saying, where can we find this book, especially if they're in the process of dealing with a spouse that's having depression issues. The book is available on Amazon, and let me just give you titles and spell Dr. Ng's name so that you can find it. If you go to Amazon, you see a search feature. If you've never looked for a book on Amazon, it's a sort of a long light gray box. Type in the words "Depression Kidnapped My Wife, a guide for husbands who want to help, by Dr. Bernard, Bernard, Ng, NG. Click on that, and the book will come right up. And you'll see, I like what you put on the cover of the book. You have a couple. Her back is turned, she's reaching back, they're holding hands, and they're heading down a beach. And I thought that was a very appropriate picture to put on the front of the cover, because this is all about couples.
Yes. Yes.
Now, they can also buy the book right there on that page. But if they want to preview the book, in the upper right-hand corner, there are two ways they can preview it there on Amazon. In the upper right-hand corner of the representation of the cover, you see two words, look inside. If you put the cursor on those two words and just click, the book opens electronically, and you'll be able to see the tips that Dr. Ng talked about that come right before the table of contents. Then you'll be able to see the chapters in the table of contents, and you'll be able to read an excerpt from the book right there. You can also buy it right there on that same page, and there is an audio clip that you are reading that's a little more than you just read to the listeners. And all you have to do is click on the audio clip, and there's your voice. There you are. Now, I know that some of our listeners, since Amazon is such a major force in the book buying and book selling industry, I know that many people will purchase their book from Amazon, but I know that there are readers who like to give other organizations rather than Amazon business. Is there somewhere else, Dr. Ng, that the book is available?
Oh, yes. It's also available in Barnes & Noble.
Excellent. Now, you're on social media. You've got a website. Let's give them the website address.
Yes, you find me in social media as @Dr. Bernardo Ng, which is BERNARDO NG. And the DR at the beginning is of doctor, so it's Dr. Bernardo Ng. And you'll find me on Facebook or Instagram and even Twitter. Yes.
Excellent. Now, I always like to give authors the opportunity to have the final word about their work. I can hear the passion in your voice as you've talked about how this book came to be. I can hear the passion that you have for your patients, the care that you have for your patients. It all comes through in your voice. And I want to give you the opportunity to have the last word with our listeners. This is a book that I believe if someone is dealing with a spouse who's having problems with depression, they'll want to buy it and keep it as a reference book. And they may want to share it with family members or even friends who are close friends and perhaps involved with the person. When the person who's a listener and listening to everything we've been saying about the book, when they pick up their copy and they become a reader, I'm not sure they'll read it cover to cover, but they'll read it as they need it. If they should read it cover to cover, when they read that last page and they close that back cover either electronically or physically, what's the major takeaway, Dr. Ng, that you want that person to take away from this book?
Oh, wow. What a great question. And yes, the main thing is that there is hope, that depression is real, but there is a way to get through it, and outcomes, the results, if you work on it, are great.
And don't think you're crazy. Don't hesitate to go see a physician, a psychiatrist, to talk about what's going on with you if you think that you may be dealing with depression. And don't hesitate to bring that spouse in. I think that's two very important messages that you also have for this book. This has been so interesting for us to talk about, and I hope that if we just reach one listener and give somebody a chance to have a different experience with depression and have a husband who understands exactly what he needs to do to support his wife, I will feel so excellent about this, because I think we brought them a very, very important book. Thank you so much for spending time with me today on Books on Air.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's been a great experience. And yes, thank you to listeners. And I totally agree with you. If one person decides to get it and finds that this can help them, that's great.
Remember, you can find Depression Kidnapped My Wife, A Guide for Husbands Who Want to Help by Dr. Bernardo, Bernardo NG, on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I hope you'll join me for the next Books on Air podcast, because remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.